In the shadows of American history, where legends often overshadow truth, there lies the story of a man whose name should echo with the same thunder as the most celebrated heroes of the Wild West. A man who was born into slavery, yet rose to embody law, justice, and resilience in a land still bleeding from division. A man whose life was so remarkable, so extraordinary, that it defies belief and reshapes the myth of the Lone Ranger. And his name was Bass Reeves, a figure who emerged not as a fictional gunslinger behind a mask, but as a living, breathing symbol of courage who carried not only a badge and a gun, but also the unshakable conviction that justice could exist even in the most lawless corners of the frontier. And to begin his story, we must go back to 1838, when Reeves was born into slavery in Crawford County, Arkansas, a boy who grew up under the chains of oppression, working the fields, enduring the brutal reality of bondage. And yet within his soul there was already an ember of defiance that would one day blaze into greatness, for fate had a way of steering him toward destiny. And during the chaos of the Civil War, he found himself serving his enslaver, a Confederate officer, until one fateful night a violent quarrel erupted between master and servant, and Reeves struck his oppressor, an act that could have cost him his life but instead became the moment that set him free, forcing him to flee into the untamed wilderness of Indian Territory, where he would spend years among the Cherokee, Creek, and Seminole people, learning their languages, their survival skills, their deep understanding of the land. And in this crucible of exile, he transformed from a runaway into a tracker, a hunter, a man who understood how to move unseen, how to read the ground as though it spoke, how to fight with both cunning and honor. And by the time freedom arrived with the abolition of slavery, Bass Reeves was no longer just a man running from his past. He was a man being forged for a future that would demand every ounce of his strength, because in 1875 the frontier was exploding with violence, banditry, and chaos, and Judge Isaac Parker, known as the hanging judge of Fort Smith, sought to impose order upon a land where outlaws believed they could kill and plunder with impunity. And so Parker appointed 200 deputy U.S. Marshals to tame the Indian Territory, and among them stood the towering figure of Reeves, the first black deputy U.S. Marshal west of the Mississippi, a man who entered the ranks not through privilege, but through merit, skill, and a reputation already whispered among those who knew the harsh wilderness. And from that moment began a career so astonishing that it would carve itself into legend. For Bass Reeves would go on to arrest more than 3,000 felons, track fugitives across hundreds of miles of dangerous terrain, and face gunfights where only nerves of steel and the speed of a draw separated life from death. Yet what made Reeves extraordinary was not just the number of arrests or the enemies he faced, but the way he carried himself, with dignity, with an unbreakable code of honor. A man who did not drink, who could not be bribed, who believed in the law even when the law had once enslaved him. And that paradox gave him power, for he knew justice was not a privilege. It was a right that even the darkest outlaw could not steal from the land. And tales of his cunning are countless, like the time he rode into a fugitive's camp, disguised as a beggar, filthy, ragged, pretending to be lost and harmless, until the outlaw welcomed him to stay. And only when the moment was perfect did Reeves spring into action, unmasking his identity and capturing his prey without a shot fired. Or the countless times he walked into danger alone, knowing ambush could wait behind every tree, yet never faltering, never retreating, because he believed fear was a disease and courage was the cure. And as his legend grew, so did the whispers that this man, this black Marshal, was the true inspiration for the Lone Ranger. For like the fictional hero, he rode a white horse. He wore disguises to fool outlaws. He carried twin pistols with unmatched accuracy. And most importantly, he lived by a code of justice that rose above revenge. Yet history, in its prejudice, chose to bury his name beneath fiction, erasing the truth so that America could embrace a masked white lawman while forgetting the black man who embodied everything that myth represented. And still the truth refuses to die because Bass Reeves's story is too powerful, too cinematic, too human to be silenced. And it builds toward a climax, not in one gunfight or one arrest, but in the sheer weight of his life. As worked for 32 years, he patrolled the frontier chasing killers, thieves, and desperados through rivers and across plains, through storms and into the dead of night, surviving ambushes, duels, and betrayals. And even when bullets tore through his hat or shattered his belt, none ever took his life. As though destiny itself was guarding him so his story could one day be told. And perhaps the most striking moment of his career came when his own son was wanted for murder and Reeves, faced with the impossible choice between blood and justice, chose the law, hunting down his boy and bringing him in. A decision that shattered him as a father, but defined him as a marshal, proving beyond all doubt that his devotion to justice was unbreakable. And in that moment, Bass Reeves transcended legend, becoming something far rarer. A man who refused to compromise, a man who proved that justice is not convenient, it is not easy, it demands sacrifice. And when his career finally ended in 1907 after the Indian Territory became Oklahoma, Reeves was 69 years old, having lived a life of danger that would have broken lesser men. And yet even then he did not fade into obscurity, serving briefly as a police officer in Muskogee before illness forced him to retire. And when he died in 1910, the world did not yet realize the magnitude of the man it lost. But today, as the myths of the West are re-examined, as voices once silenced are finally given their due, the story of Bass Reeves rises from the dust, more gripping than any dime novel, more inspiring than any fiction. Because he was proof that greatness is not born of privilege but of perseverance. That true heroism does not wear a mask, it wears scars. And so when we speak of the Lone Ranger, let us strip away the myth and see the man who lived it. The real Lone Ranger, Bass Reeves, whose name should be carved alongside the greatest of American legends, because his story is not just about the West, it is about justice, resilience, and the unbreakable spirit of a man who began his life in chains but ended it in history. And that is why when we remember Bass Reeves, we do not just remember a marshal, we remember a symbol, a reminder that the truth may be buried, but it cannot be erased, that legends fade but justice endures. And in the echo of gunfire across the frontier, in the hoofbeats of a white horse charging through the night, in the resolve of a man who never broke his word, Bass Reeves still rides not as fiction but as fact, the real Lone Ranger.